This 100% whole grain sourdough rye bread is healthy, hearty, and extremely flavorful. As a bonus, this dough will actually tell you when it's ready to be baked. We'll get to that later. Here's how to make the recipe. To a mixing bowl, add 425 grams of water, 10 grams of salt, then 100 grams of rye sourdough starter. I made this the night before by taking 25 grams of starter out of the fridge and feeding it 50 grams of whole grain rye flour and 50 grams of water. By the next morning, it had doubled in size and was ready to use. After the starter, add 15 grams of molasses. This is technically optional, but molasses is commonly used in rye breads, and it gives a complex flavor that I really enjoy with this type of bread. Stir all of the wet ingredients together to dissolve the salt and starter into the water. Then add 450 grams of whole grain rye flour to the mixing bowl. After that, add the final ingredient, 100 grams of seeds and nuts. You can use any type of seeds and nuts that you would like, but I used 50 grams of pepita pumpkin seeds and 50 grams of chopped walnuts that I soaked for 30 minutes in hot water. Once your seeds are soaked and drained, add them to the mixing bowl along with the flour. Mix everything together with a fork or spatula until it forms a cohesive dough with no dry bits of flour remaining. In addition to being a very wet dough, because this is made with rye flour instead of wheat flour, this will feel a lot more like a batter than a dough. Rye has a very different gluten content than wheat, so this dough won't seem anything like a wheat-based dough at all. Just know that going in. It's going to feel more like a batter, very loose, and not like a dough that holds together. Now, once your dough is mixed and flattened down, cover it up with a kitchen towel and let it rise at room temperature for 3 to 5 hours. You want to wait until the dough rises slightly in the bowl and feels a little bit puffy and inflated with air. 4 hours later, my dough felt puffy and it was sufficiently risen. Now it's time to move this to the pan. Shaping is almost non-existent with this kind of dough batter. You can pretty much dump the batter directly into the pan that you're going to be baking in. No stretching or shaping or folding really needed at all. So grease a metal loaf pan with oil, then spoon the batter into the pan, and then smooth it down on the top. If you're using this exact same pan that I'm using, or a similar one, the dough will fill the pan about 3/4 of the way to the top. I'll link to my favorite nonstick pan in the video description. To let this bread proof, sprinkle the top of the dough with a little more rye flour, cover it up, and let it rise for 3 to 5 hours at room temperature. I said earlier that this dough will tell you when it's ready to be baked, so here's what you're looking for. Once the dough is about risen to the top, look for cracks or bubbles showing on top of the dough. Once you see a few cracks or bubbles reaching the surface of the dough, that's the 100% rye dough telling you that it can't hold on much longer. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's essentially what the dough is telling you. It wants to be baked. So when the dough roughly reaches the top of the pan and you start seeing cracks, preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Then when the oven is preheated, slide the pan into the middle rack of your oven and throw a few ice cubes onto the oven floor to provide some steam. You can also put boiling water into a metal pan to add steam to the oven. Either way is fine. Let the bread bake at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for a whole hour. Once fully baked, remove the bread from the pan and transfer it to a wire rack to cool. If the bread seems slightly underdone, check it with a probe thermometer. You're looking for something around 198 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's fully baked, let the bread cool for at least 2 hours before you slice into it. Traditionally, some cultures allow rye breads like this to rest for 12 to 24 hours in a linen cloth, or maybe even longer, before they actually end up eating the bread. Now, if you've got the patience for that, go for it. Good bread does take time, I totally agree with you. But if you don't have the patience, I get it. Go ahead and enjoy this bread on the same day with some butter, or even other savory toppings would be great. And if you're watching this video and you haven't even made your own sourdough starter yet, you're going to want to make that first. So watch this video, it'll show you how to make your own starter from scratch with rye flour, then come back and use that same starter to make this bread. I'll see you in the next video.